So I am delighted to welcome Mary Beth now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So a couple of questions. I want to go right to the questions that our online audience had. We had a few that came in, really engaging commentary on your session. I think really resonated with our online audiences. We could also see clearly happening in the room here. But Kim had a question about, she would really love to deep dive into the steps that you recommend for using influence and fighting for what you do want when you first enter a new team or project.
Oh, that's a great question. So for using influence when you first enter a team, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is to again, realize we're social creatures. And the first step, people are much more likely to work with you on your vision if they believe you're invested in them personally. So taking the time to build the relationship and get to know, not just advancing your own vision, get to know what their vision is. You know, what's more powerful than an individual vision is when you can come to a place where a group of people find a collective vision for where they want to take a meeting or event, and they all believe in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That leads me to another question that Rude actually had, and it's how do you claim event design time with your leaders? How do you make that a priority, and how do you insert yourself in that process to engage at the table in those discussions with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would suggest a couple of things. One, creating the event strategy and that strategic blueprint isn't an activity in and of itself that is separate from putting together the plans for marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And so a couple of things. One, with the amount of investment that's being made in the meeting or event, to ask for a half a day is not very much to ask for.
Such a great point.
It's not. It's a half-day investment, maybe a day, to put together collectively that strategic blueprint with the executive sponsors, with them as a part of a co-creative process. I'd say minimum a half a day. And again, it's not a very big investment if you really want to create strategic value and you're all on the same page on that.
And then how do you, as the leader in that scenario, the champion for event design, continue then to re-engage the C-suite and your leadership in giving them updates, making them really feel like they're part of that process once that design is in place?
Well, and I think that's part of it, almost consider it contracting with the executives, right? So contracting with them is to elevate the strategic value. Do they want that? Yes, most likely they do. Well, then in order to do that, here's the process that we recommend going through. One, engaging you in the development of this strategic blueprint. And two, a regular touch base to make sure that we're all on the same page. I mean, the reality is a lot of those executives will probably be on the stage. Right? So it's a regular touch base. And what works better with executives, I find, is not going into detailed plans. They oftentimes don't have tolerance for that, but you can come back to a one-page blueprint.
Right. What's that high level that's really going to catch them?
High level. Yep. How are we making progress, and where are we on the roadmap now? And what's important in terms of the experience we're wanting to create, and they'll be a part of creating that experience, right? From welcoming the guest to whatever it might be. So that's what I would suggest. It's really a contracting in upfront on we're all together creating greater value that should be measurable.
Right. Absolutely. So I just want to encourage you all to keep your questions coming. We have a few more minutes here with Mary Beth. A couple things that I wanted to just touch on. What was the aha moment for you? You mentioned in your session that there was a moment where it became a complete shift in your career to really focus more on leadership. Where did you identify that was the gap that was missing between our vision and strategy and that really thoughtful execution?
Yeah, I would say really the biggest aha moment for me in my career was when I had the opportunity to create a business inside of a business, so entrepreneur. But I think you can think of your meeting as a business. I do.
Yeah.
And once you see it through the lens of I'm the business owner creating this business, you think different.
You have an ownership stake, right? A true ownership
stake. And it becomes your vision, not just executing on somebody else's, you know? So it's a different mindset once you kind of take that on as I'm the owner of this. And I need to partner, of course, with the executives. I need to partner with the stakeholders and so on. But it's this mindset of ownership, really.
Well, and that's interesting because you talked about traits of a leader in your presentation. So for folks who might not feel that innately, you may be in a really high level position, even within your organization, a director of meetings or something where that really is your level of responsibility. How do we empower ourselves to take on that leadership role if we don't feel like that entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, is something that's innately in us?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I would say, it is innately in you because you all have the drive to create. So it's there. You just might want to wake it up a little bit, right? It's there. And I think the key then is to find what it is that you're passionate about creating. What is it that, it sparks something in you that you want to see a certain impact made through the meeting or the event that you're responsible for. And if you can find that, and hopefully that's based in obviously the needs of the constituents that are a part of that, it has to be, or it won't be effective. But find that in yourself. Find it in yourself. It's the quote that I shared from Maxwell that it really comes from your own passion. It does. And so do a little soul searching on that.
Right, exactly. I might need to spend a little of extra time to really embrace that. Tell me a little bit more about that step-by-step design blueprint, and what are the benefits of going through that exercise? We talked a little bit about the beginning of really bringing your leadership through that process. Why is that so important to really be that living, breathing documentation of where you're going, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there?
Yeah, so I would just say, I'm an advocate of getting it on one sheet of paper, because I think what can happen is things can get really complicated. And so the value of having a single sheet of paper, then, and step by step articulating the vision, which has to do with the result you're trying to create, the mission, and all the things I talked about in the session, is that by the time you're done and you've done it as a group, you should share the commitment to make it happen with the executive team, with the sponsors of the event, that you share in that commitment. And furthermore, I would say then that blueprint be a living document. It should not be something that is put on a shelf and then you never see it again. In my view, the blueprint should be shared with all of the suppliers for your event. Everybody should know where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
They're going to have way better ideas and serve you way better if they know where you're trying to go strategically, and they have a better sense of who your audience is and what matters to them. So it's a living document that's shared with every stakeholder that has to bring the event and the meeting to life.
So let's talk a little bit about that because, as someone in this space, obviously, bringing those stakeholders to the table early to really drink the Kool-Aid of what that document is, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that process of bringing all those stakeholders in so that just as then all of the leadership is on board and really embracing what's happening in all of the steps that need to take place to make that vision come to life, your stakeholders and your vendor partners are part of that process as well. Talk about when we bring those folks into the process and how to indoctrinate them into that blueprint.
Right. Well, I think the most important stakeholder to start with is the people who will experience the event or the meeting, right? So it's that moccasin project, right? Put yourself into their shoes, and you might have different personas, right? Different segments to your audience. And so you're going to want to understand what it is that's important to them for each segment of your audience. That, to me, is number one, and that's something you do before you meet to put the blueprint together.
Right.
Because when you come in to do the strategy and to do the blueprint, you should be fully informed with this is what's important, to the different segments. And then in terms of the actual meeting itself, the key stakeholders inside the organization should be in that meeting.
Yes.
Right. In terms of involving your suppliers, it's really important, once you've got a strategy and you've got it hopefully on that single sheet of paper, and you're asking for them to make recommendations to you, share it with them. Share it with them so they know what you're trying to do. And let them kind of get out of the box a little bit in terms of being creative in their recommendations on how to best serve your vision and your goals for that meeting or event. So that would happen after the blueprint is put together. it doesn't have to be that linear, but that would probably be the best, kind of involving first your audience, then your sponsors, and then involving your suppliers and recommendations, where they can really be creative with that.
Fantastic points. Okay, Mary Beth, we have another question that's coming from Carolyn, and that's how do you prioritize those segments, right? We have to avoid the trap of trying to be all things to all people, or I should say avoid the trap of being too generic, but being as much of all things to all people as we can without being watered down in none of them, right?
Yeah, right.
So how do you prioritize those segments and how to create effective experiences that address all of those stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, I think some of that is then having flexibility in the experience itself. I mean, we still hold a little bit of a hierarchical mindset that things happen mostly from the stage. The stage is only one vehicle. So, for example, could you find ways, and I know that's happening here at PCMA, right, where people can convene with others in kind of an affinity group, right? But they have to be able to find each other.
Right.
So could you build a strategy where people can find one another who share common interests, and they can have a session just with each other,
right?
Or it could be facilitated. So increasingly, I think what needs to happen is we have to consider the stage one vehicle, but there's a lot of vehicles for building the social bonds and building kind of affinity groups within the broader community that have more in common with each other and can learn from each other. We learn as much from each other as we do from the stage, quite honestly.
Absolutely, and the ability to cement takeaways, and the ability to have those conversations that really take the opportunity to internalize what you've heard. It's funny, one of the things that we're seeing in play here on site is these Apple-scented notebooks and the great blueprint that's in there that allows people to really digest some of the key learnings and walk away with real actionable takeaways.
Right.
So allowing the attendee to take a minute to just think about everything that they've learned and how they're going to apply that. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth.
And thank
really,
you to everybody.
Really appreciate your time.